People who were there say the silence came first. Not shouting, not panic, just a strange pause, the kind that happens when something private crosses an invisible line and suddenly becomes public. It was never meant to be noticed. A quiet break, away from schedules and expectations, away from cameras and headlines. A moment that felt ordinary enough to disappear into memory. And yet, in a matter of seconds, it turned into something no one at that place would forget. Not because of spectacle, but because of how unexpected it felt. The kind of moment that makes you realize how fragile calm really is. Those nearby remember the stillness more than the movement. Chairs untouched, conversations stopped mid-sentence. A feeling that something important had just happened, even if no one yet understood what it meant. By the time anyone thought to reach for their phone, the moment itself had already passed. Only its echo remained. That is how stories like this begin, not with noise, but with silence. According to several people who later spoke quietly about what they saw, the setting could not have seemed more ordinary. A shared space, casual conversation, no raised voices at first, nothing to suggest that emotions were about to surface. It was the kind of environment where people assume everyone around them is simply passing through, carrying their own lives elsewhere. Then, someone approached. Not hurried, not hesitant, just direct. The kind of approach that immediately shifts attention without saying a word. Those seated at nearby tables sensed the change before they could explain it. A tension that didn't belong there. What followed lasted only moments. There was no drawn-out scene, no dramatic exchange designed for an audience. Just a brief action that felt completely out of place. Not because of its intensity, but because of where it happened and who was present. People later said it wasn't the act itself that unsettled them, but the realization that they were witnessing something deeply personal unfold where it never should have. And then came the reactions. This is where the story stops being singular. Some witnesses recall one person standing abruptly, their expression visibly shaken, as if struggling to process what had just happened. Others insist there was a moment of stillness instead, a pause that suggested conflict not yet spoken aloud. A few say words were exchanged before anything else occurred, though no two accounts agree on what was said or how it was said. What everyone agrees on is that the atmosphere changed instantly. The ease of the space vanished. What remained was discomfort, confusion, and the unmistakable sense that boundaries had been crossed. From that point on, the details splinter. One person describes concern and restraint. Another remembers tension and frustration. Someone else focuses on the expressions rather than the actions, describing faces that seemed caught between shock and restraint. Each version feels believable on its own, yet impossible to fully reconcile with the others. That contradiction is precisely why this moment has lingered. In situations like this, people look for clarity, a statement, an explanation, something to anchor the narrative. But none arrived. There was no official account to settle the questions, no confirmation to draw a clear line between what was assumed and what was true. Instead, there was silence. And silence has a way of expanding. In the absence of answers, attention shifted elsewhere, to timing, to past associations, to fragments pulled from memory and social media, arranged into theories that felt logical to some and unfair to others. The story stopped being about what happened in that moment and became about what might have led to it. For many watching from the outside, that is where the emotional weight truly settled. Not in the action itself, but in the possibility that unresolved feelings had been left to surface at the worst possible time. The idea that private matters, when avoided for too long, don't simply disappear, they wait. What makes this situation resonate is not fame or recognition, it is familiarity. Most people have experienced a moment where something meant to stay contained escaped its boundaries, where silence felt safer than confrontation, until silence was no longer an option. Seeing that dynamic play out in public unsettles because it reflects something deeply human. Those involved were eventually separated. The space returned to normal, conversations resumed, though more quietly. On the surface, the incident ended there, but its impact did not. Within hours, different versions began circulating, each shaped by perspective, emotion, and assumption. Some focused on composure, others on responsibility. Many asked the same question from different angles. Could this have been avoided? That question remains unanswered. What is clear is that once a moment like this enters the public consciousness, control is lost. Narratives take on lives of their own. Silence becomes interpreted rather than understood, and the people at the center of the story are no longer the only ones telling it. Perhaps the most striking part is how quickly judgment fills the gaps left by uncertainty. Not always harsh, but rarely patient. In a world that moves fast, pauses are uncomfortable. Yet sometimes, a pause is the most honest response available. This story has endured not because of what can be proven, but because of what it invites people to reflect on. How easily private emotions can surface without warning. How public spaces offer no protection when personal history arrives unannounced. And how quickly a single moment can redefine how others see you, regardless of intent. In the end, there may never be a version everyone agrees on, and maybe that is the point. Some stories are not meant to be resolved neatly. They exist as reminders that behind every headline or whispered account are real people navigating situations with no clear script. If you've stayed with this story until now, thank you for listening with an open mind. At LVT-SHOWBIZ, we believe in sharing moments like these not to judge, but to understand, reflect, and discuss with respect. If you appreciate thoughtful storytelling that looks beyond the surface and values perspective over certainty, we invite you to subscribe to the channel and join our growing community. Your support allows us to continue exploring the human side of showbiz with care and balance. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you again in the next story.